The girl stood in the doorway like a ghost made real, her small hands gripping a carpet bag that had seen better years. She was 17, too young to be out here on the edge of the Montana wilderness, and far too delicate for the life that waited beyond that door. Clara had the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare, golden hair that caught the light like wheat, blue eyes deep as a mountain lake, and skin untouched by hard work or sun. But what unsettled Thomas Brennan most wasn't her beauty. It was her silence. She hadn't spoken once since her father counted the money, signed the papers, and rode away without looking back. Thomas stood awkwardly in his cabin doorway, wiping his hands on worn denim. The place had never felt smaller. Every creak of the wood, every dancing shadow on the pine walls reminded him of how alone he'd been for years. He'd spent half his life on this land, 34 now, more used to the sound of wind than voices. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles south, and winters here were long enough to make a man forget what laughter sounded like. He had sent for a wife through the matrimonial papers, expecting a grown woman who knew what hard living meant, not a trembling girl who looked like she belonged in a parlor, not a cabin. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. Clara's eyes flicked toward him, then to the fire glowing softly in the stone hearth. She shook her head, just barely. The marriage papers crinkled in Thomas's shirt pocket. Her father had signed them in exchange for enough money to save his farm, legal, proper, by every territorial law. But now, seeing her standing there in that thin dress, the words on those papers felt heavy and wrong. He'd dreamed of a wife, a home filled with warmth and laughter, not a girl who looked like she might disappear if he breathed too hard. "The spare room's yours," he said after a long pause. "Lock works from the inside." For the first time, she looked straight at him. There was something in her eyes, surprise, maybe relief. She nodded once and clutched her bag tighter. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and snow began to fall, soft and steady. Winter had come early, and they were about to be trapped together longer than either had planned. 3 days passed like a quiet dance. Thomas worked from dawn till dusk, tending cattle in the bitter cold, chopping wood, mending fences. When he came back each night, he'd find Clara moving quietly through the kitchen. She cooked simple meals, cleaned with care, and never said a word. She hardly met his eyes, but there was something steady in her movements, a rhythm that made the lonely cabin feel almost like a home. On the 4th morning, he found her standing barefoot in front of the frosted window. Her nightgown was thin, her lips pale with cold. "Jesus, girl," Thomas said softly, pulling a blanket from the couch. "You'll catch your death." He draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at first but didn't pull away. "Clara," he said, waiting until she met his eyes. "This ain't right." "None of it." Her eyes widened. Fear flickered there, fear he might send her back. "I know what that paper says," he continued, his voice gentler now. "But you're still a child. And I ain't the kind of man who," he stopped, running a hand through his graying hair. "What I mean is, nothing has to happen here that you don't want. Nothing." Clara's fingers twisted in the wool blanket. Her lips trembled as she finally spoke, her voice so soft he almost didn't catch it. "Papa said you'd expect certain things. Said it was my duty now." The words hit Thomas like a hammer. He saw again her father's hollow face, smelled the cheap whiskey on his breath. Rage stirred in his chest. "Your papa was wrong about a lot of things," he said quietly. "You're safe here. That's what matters." Something changed in her face then. The wall she built around herself cracked just a little. She nodded, blinking back tears. But before Thomas could say more, a new sound cut through the silence, the sharp rhythm of hooves. Several horses. Fast. He looked through the frosted window. 4 riders were approaching the cabin. The man in front wore a silver badge that gleamed even in the pale morning light, a territorial marshal. Behind him rode 3 men Thomas recognized by reputation. Clara's uncle, William Hayes, and 2 hired guns who made their living by trouble. The knock at the door rattled the cabin. "Open up, Brennan," a deep voice called. "Official business." Thomas brushed his hand over the rifle above the fireplace but didn't take it down. He opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch. "Marshal Garrett," he said evenly. "Kind of early for visitors." "This ain't a visit," the marshal replied. "Complaint was filed. Says you're holding a minor against her family's wishes." "Might want to check your papers," Thomas said, calm but alert. "She's my lawful wife. Married proper with her father's blessing." William Hayes spat into the snow. "That marriage ain't legal. Girl was coerced. We got witnesses say you forced her." Thomas felt ice settle in his gut. He'd expected something like this. Her uncle had likely waited until the money was gone before deciding to come get her back, maybe to sell her again to someone else. "Those witnesses," Thomas said slowly, "wouldn't include her father, would they? The same man who took my money?" "Money that came from stolen cattle," Hayes shot back. "That makes the whole deal illegal." It was a lie, but a clever one. They meant to trap him, drag him to court, and take Clara while he was locked away. Inside, the floorboards creaked. Clara stepped into the doorway, still wrapped in the blanket, pale but steady. "Uncle William," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "I wondered when you'd come." The marshal turned toward her. "Miss Hayes, you need to come with us. There've been serious allegations." Clara looked at Thomas, holding his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped forward until she stood beside him on the porch, bare feet in the snow. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. The marshal frowned. "Miss, you don't understand." "Protection?" she interrupted. "Did Uncle William tell you what he wanted to protect me from?" William's face twisted. "Girl's been poisoned against her family. Don't listen to her lies." But Clara didn't stop. "He told Papa I was too pretty to waste on a cowboy. Said there were men in Denver who'd pay more. Men who didn't bother with marriage papers." The words hung in the air like thunder. The marshal's eyes narrowed. The 2 hired guns shifted in their saddles, suddenly uneasy. "That's a serious charge," Garrett said slowly. Clara reached into her gown and pulled out a folded letter. Her hands shook, but she held it out. "He wrote Papa about it. Papa kept the letter because he couldn't read it. I can." The marshal took it, unfolded the paper, and read. As his eyes moved over the words, his expression changed. When he looked up again, his voice was cold. "This letter describes arrangements that break multiple territorial laws, Mr. Hayes. She forged it." William shouted. "Girl's lying to save herself." Garrett turned the paper over. "In your handwriting. With names of men we've already been investigating." The hired guns exchanged glances. Then, without a word, they mounted up and rode off. They wanted no part in what came next. "William Hayes," Garrett said, drawing his cuffs. "You're under arrest for conspiracy in human trafficking." He snapped the irons around the man's wrists. "This ain't over, Clara." William spat as the marshal forced him onto his horse. "Your papa'll hear of this." "Papa's dead," she said quietly. 3 days after you left with Thomas's money. Drank himself to death." The clearing went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Garrett gave Thomas a short nod. "You did right by her, Brennan." Then he turned and rode away with his prisoner. Thomas and Clara stood on the porch long after the sound of hooves faded. The snow kept falling, soft and steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked finally. "About your father. About the letter." Clara turned toward him. Her face looked older somehow, steadier. "Because I needed to know what kind of man you were. Whether you'd protect me or use me, like the others wanted to." She smiled faintly. Now I know. Thomas didn't speak. He just nodded and followed her inside. She set about making coffee with sure, careful movements. The cabin felt warmer, fuller, alive in a way it hadn't before. They were still strangers in some ways, still learning to trust. But they had time now, time to build something real. Years later, when Clara was 25 and their daughter played in that same kitchen, she would tell Thomas that she hadn't fallen in love with the man who'd bought her, but with the man who'd set her free. Outside, snow blanketed the world in white, clean and endless, like a promise.